Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to bring your assets over from Substance Painter over into Substance Stager and show you a little bit of Substance Stager. So first off, we're going to be using the template file that is brought in with Substance Stager. So you see this one right here called Studio Pack Shot. So the nice thing about this one, it has diagnostic spheres and a color checker chart in it already, and it is a very simple environment. So if you don't already have it, you'll probably have a download button and it's a couple of megabytes. So go ahead and get started with that. And then once you have that prepared, then what you do is you click on it, you choose a preset. None of these really matter because you can disable and re-enable them inside. But I'm just going to start with the first one and we're going to click create. And that's going to create our first level. And so I like to go ahead and have this level up and ready to go before I make do the process of bringing it over into Substance from Substance Painter. Okay, so here it is. Just let it kind of go for a couple seconds. So the first thing I like to do is over here we have our outliner underneath the scene. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to these assets and I'm just going to hide those preview assets. So there's a shoe and a bag, which are cool. If you want to make the file smaller, you can just go ahead and delete them. There's not going to delete them from your computer. In the backgrounds, you can see them here. There's backgrounds that you can change, so we can do those. The good thing about the backgrounds and the backdrops, the floor, is it's going to give you some bounce light. The bad thing is it's going to make your renders go a little bit slower because then you have to sample those. So it's up to you, but I'm going to go ahead and disable them. And then I'm going to come up here to environment and I'm going to go ahead and go to the background and set it to a gray color. And then I'm going to do environment background opacity down to 0. And then further, you can go ahead and click on this I button and do grid if you don't want to see the grid, but I'll leave it on for now. Okay, here I am over in Substance Painter. I have this big file. It's got a lot of texture maps. It's pretty heavy. And I also have things like displacement enabled. So that's going to make this a little bit more complicated. If you don't have displacement, that's not an issue. Just remember that if you have special texture set stuff, so for instance, I have displacement enabled, but if you want a different channel, so for instance, if you're doing coat or subsurface scattering or translucency, that you want to make sure those are enabled, and whatever you're previewing here, you might have to make adjustments over in Substance Stager. We're not going to go into that too much here, but all you really have to do is you have to come over here to Files, into Substance 3D Stager. And then it's going to do a little export. This part doesn't take too long. But then what happens is when it's done over in Stager, you're going to get a little pop-up in the middle right here that's going to essentially ask me to import it. One thing I do want to call attention to is, oh, there it goes. So I'll go ahead and say import. So while that's going, one thing I do want to call attention to is that I have my project configuration set to be using, or I need to set it to use DirectX. So far, I haven't noticed that causing any specific problems, but when you export your normal map, as far as I can tell, Substance Stager is using DirectX and not OpenGL. So if you're using OpenGL, you might be using OpenGL for a number of reasons, one of those being using RenderMan, but we're just going to go ahead and switch that. But I'm not going to worry about it for right now, and we'll see if the normal maps cause a problem. So I have displacement, so it's doing a lot more prep, and my file can get heavier. One thing that's probably a good idea is these aren't light programs. They're very fast and responsive, and it's a very fluid process going back and forth from one to the other. But I'm going to go ahead and close Substance Painter when I'm done with it. Before I do that, I might want to export my textures. So what I would do is I would use, let's go up to Substance 3D Stager output template. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and choose, let's see, downloads. We'll call this one bag textures. And we're gonna go ahead and click export. So that's just going to get my texture maps in case any of them are missing in Stager. Hopefully there won't be a situation like that, but if there is, this will make sure that we still have texture maps that we can plug in. So just going to wait for that to finish. Okay, here we go. Once those are all blue, I can go ahead and close that, and now I can close Substance Painter, and we're going to come back to Stager. So here's my backpack. A couple things. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the interface and how to navigate here. So first off, by default up here, you have this group select. So this is going to be your whole object, and you'll see it came over in a folder. So if you ever need to select individual components, you just click this to turn off group select, and it's not going to select the folder, it's going to select the individual geometry. When you do that, you can see they have transform values, so I can actually move them and separate them and pose them. And then I have materials attached to them. So you can see here I have my material settings, I have my texture maps. I'd come in here and double check if I have my texture maps. If there's something missing, like the roughness map was missing, that's why I export my texture map, because I can just go in and open it. I don't have any metal on this object, so I don't expect to see a metalness map, but let's see if that did that for the metals. So if we come over to the materials, so you can see it has metallic map. So I just want to double check these and make sure your texture maps are showing up. Okay, continuing with navigation. So we have this move gizmo, and you can use the buttons that are similar to Maya for navigation. So Q is for this multi gizmo, W is for move, E is for rotate, R is for scale. We also have object space versus world space. By default, it's going to be world space. So if your object's too far away from you, you might want to pull it a little bit closer. Okay. When you're looking through the camera, this one's locked in this file. And so you can see this little sphere right here. This is means that I'm in the camera, and you can see it's locked, right? So if I want to switch to a different camera, I can click on this little button right here. You can see I can't see anything in this one, and we'll click on this one too. And so it's focusing back there. So maybe I want to go ahead and move that back. So we're just going to move that backwards, back to the center. And I probably can see it from the top now. And I might just scale it up so that it's more visible from the front camera. So we'll go to the front camera. There we go. Maybe scale it down. Okay. All right. And so if you want to make any changes to it, you can just uncheck the unlock, and then that lets you move the camera. And when you lock it, you can't move it anymore. And if I want to leave the camera, I can just leave all of them, and I'm just in a default perspective mode. Right, so navigation's pretty similar to most 3D packages, so you'll get a hang of it. But I'm just moving around and looking at stuff. It's a good idea to go ahead and detach or go away from your camera and come over and look at your textures. I'm going to go ahead and hide the grid right now. I don't really need to see the grid. So I'm just going to take a look at this. It looks pretty good. I think a lot of my stuff came through really well, including the displacement. The downside is, compared to my other one, the normal maps are pretty harsh and crunchy. This is something I noticed going from Substance Painter to Substance Stager. Sometimes the normal maps are pretty intense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off group select, and I'm going to select the objects that have those really intense normals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to normal, so we can change this scale. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 0.25. In my case, I already played around with this. And so that's a little low, so let's do something like 0.35. I just want it to look a little bit closer to my other asset. So I'm going to click on this one, and same thing, I'm going to come over here and type 0.35. And the normals are looking pretty good on the other aspects. And I might push it back up if I feel like the normals aren't reading very well. So yeah, so that's just making some quick corrections to my model. What I might want to do next is change the lighting a bit. So in this default file, there is actually a top light. So there's a light source if I press F here, which is kind of nice because a lot of times your HDRIs aren't going to have a lot of top light coming in. So if I just delete that, you can see darkens. One thing you might want to turn on pretty early on and test out is ray tracing. So when we do our final beauty renders, we want to do it with ray tracing because it's going to give us more accurate bounce, light, and cast shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and click on enable ray tracing. This usually takes a couple seconds, and with your computer it might go a little bit slower, but we're just going to enable that so we get a little bit more accurate material interactions, and this is going to show your material a little bit more realistically, so just keep that in mind. So there's that top light, and if it's too much, then we can come in here and we can either hide it, or we can go ahead and change the intensity or position of it. And so the settings for them are pretty simple, right? You just have exposure or intensity. They're a little bit interchangeable. They just change the intensity a certain degree. And then we also have color. So I might actually just bring this intensity down to like 100% of what it currently is. One thing I like to do sometimes is I like to do a back rim light. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and create a light source. So we'll click on, oh, actually, I think, yeah, area light. So here we have our light sources. So if you want to do a directional light, that's essentially going to be like your sunlight. But I'm just going to go ahead and drop one in. Oops. Oh, okay. So it has this really cool placement where you can place it on the ground and then place its height. So I'll just do something like that. And then it's look at target. Actually, I think that's it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it to face the bag. And I'm just going to go ahead and position it back here and then maybe scale it up a little bit. Oops. Come on. So let's go ahead and increase the width and height. So let's set that to like 40 by 40. All right, and I'm just going to increase the exposure until I can feel it. If it's too close, you'll start to feel like I can feel that that's too close, so I might want to push that back and pump up my exposure a little bit more. So let's do 24. Ooh, too much. 18. And that's probably too much, so we're just going to exposures, they go in stops, so it can change dramatically between like one or two. So if you need to fine tune, I find the intensity is usually better for that. So you get exposure to get the general brightness for how far away the object is, and then just use intensity to dial in the brightness. The other thing we probably want to check is we want to check consistency between our lighting setup here and our lighting setup in the other file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my environment. So my environment settings are going to be all the different settings for global lighting and look. So if I come over here to light, so you can see I have a studio back soft light. And so if you come over here, there's these pre-made assets. So this is pretty handy. There's objects you can put in. There's materials you can throw in there as well. But what's nice is they have these lights. And so these are like the HDRI lights you have. So in my other file, I have either Panorama Map or I'll use Tomoko Studio, one or the two. And so I'm just going to go ahead and drop that and replace that. So that's going to change the lighting. And then if I need to change its intensity, I probably leave it at 100 and then just use this rotation here to get the right angle. And so I would get this to look very similar to how it looks in my Substance Painter file. And I like to compare this to my Painter file. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a screenshot of Substance Painter and then I can bring it up and make sure this is looking good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this through my camera. For my object, I would ideally put it on like a turntable, and you can bring in turntable animations, but a good hero shot is going to be a little bit to the side. You don't want to look straight on something because that tends to look a little flat. Another thing I like to do is I'm going to go ahead and reuse these high angle cameras. So I'm going to unlock this one and take a look at it, look through it, and I'm going to go ahead and get some detail shots. Oops. Let's just go ahead and I can click on the asset in the outliner, and I can come in here and press F, and that's going to frame it, just like if you were inside of Maya or Blender or another program like that. So I can come in here, and if there's any like details or anything that you want to show off or get a closer look at, we can do that. Let's go ahead and set this to 100%. Let's set this, yeah, that's fine. 100% is fine. So let's just pull that back a little bit. Well, let's go ahead and set it fit to canvas. All right. And then let's see, is there a way I can move this over? Nope. Okay. So I like to have like a detail shot like this. Another thing you can do with your camera when you're using ray tracing is you can select the camera. So this high angle one, I'm going to rename it to camera detail. And I usually have multiple, so detail one. And so what you can do is you can actually use depth of field. So I'm going to come in here and turn on depth of field, and you can click on set focal point. So if I set it like that, and we're going to turn off the preview stuff inside the viewport. Actually, this thing right here, once I unselect it, there we go. And actually you can go to select, deselect all. But now we have a little camera defocus on the edges, so it gets a little blurry, so it adds a little extra depth and dimension. And if I turned on those backgrounds, so let's go ahead and turn on this one. Uh, Here we go. And so my computer's pretty fast, so you're probably not noticing it, but that does make my renders go slightly slower because I'm calculating the bounce light from one object onto another object. So yeah, anyways, this is pretty much it. If when you're ready to render, you can come over here to render. I leave GPU rendering on. It's if you ever have the option, it's always a good idea to do that. I'll set it to high. Denoise expert's fine, displacement's fine, resolution's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on export. And so that's just going to go ahead and export that out onto my desktop or wherever I save it. And on your camera, you would set your resolution. So the resolution set to full. If you need to change it to a different crop or resolution, I would just change that on the camera itself. So we come over here, we're going to camera, and you can see output size right here. And then when we click render, we'll have a beautiful render. So we'll just go ahead and click on this and I'll show you guys once it's done. Okay, just finished. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my desktop. So I put mine on my desktop here. We're going to open it up and there we go. We have a high resolution render with that depth of fields. It doesn't have as much customizability as you're going to get out of RenderMan, Unreal, or any other professional renderer, but it's very quick and fast and easy to use. So there we go. That's pretty much it, and that's all you really need to know to get started to bring your assets from Substance Painter over into Substance Stager.